was January 31st.
Calls to order and do the, and then do fun.
All right, call the meeting to order. This is policy committee meeting, January 31st, 2023. Today we have myself, John Donaldson, and Chris Weigert, along with Superintendent Jen Wimmer, and Joel is excused and cannot make it forward. Okay. Please stand and join for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We are in the midst of the 400 series, so we had taken a culmination of our previous conversations that went to a first reading for the board. This is our second set. We were just finalizing some calendars. We'll post the next meetings that are coming up, and then we'll take care of the last remaining set in the 400 series. Recall that 400 series is around students. For those watching at home, in board docs, if you're watching us live today, there is an issue with that company, and it's some very small font. We're aware of it and made note of it. They anticipate that fix will come on Thursday, so that our documents will be more easily viewed. They can also, all policy is found on our website, so if that's a little bit easier view for you today, that would be fine. With that said, if you're ready, I will lead us through the attachment, are the series that we're going to focus on today, really centrally some big ideas and then around nursing and those services. I worked with Amy Brager, who is our district nurse. She in turn is has worked with, remember we have certified nurses, LPNs, et cetera. We have professional health room staff in all of our schools. So she in turn consulted with them as well. And I know that she's going to be cleaning up. There's an AR on medication delivery. They're just going to make sure and review as a team so that they're on point on that. But with that, I will dig into our slate of policies. So again, for those who are here, we did have a printout. It's a little smaller. That might be easiest for us today. And that first one is the 411. It's equality of educational opportunity. And you'll notice our district put a little spin by putting also the pupil non-discrimination and harassment all in one comprehensive policy. So the language in and of itself, as you can see, I have a couple strike throughs that I would recommend. It's just where we're referring back to a statute. On those, I would strike those so that they're not in there. I would look at that second paragraph. It's really rehashing legal stuff. That appears at the end, all those legal connections, all those pieces. So I don't think they need to be so stated there. And sometimes they can create a conflict if a statute's, changed in numbering, something like that, and we can get out of alignment that way. That would be the first recommendation. And the other is, this holds the piece around religious beliefs and some exemptions or accommodations that you might make for deeply held religious beliefs. And it says that it's a confidential request for an accommodation. So I would share if a student has an accommodation, it's implying that like an administrator would keep that confidential. They would make that known to whoever's working with the student, whether it's a teacher. We would restrict that information as needed following our guidelines, but I wouldn't want people to read this and think this was something held by one individual. Whomever would need that information would be apprised of that information. So I'll give you some time to look at that. Behind that, I've got, in my former life, we separated those. WASB numbering system does allow for a separation of 411. And then the next one, 411.1, is the official numbering for harassment, and more defining what that needs. And you can see ours kind of co-mingles those two. So I'll let you take a look at content, and then I'll let you look at those other examples to see which direction you think might be clear for people using policy language.
One thing I just saw, well, and it's probably in here somewhere, but
Go
where you got to strike through the Wisconsin statute 115.28.
Yep.
Where does that align with the stuff that we're having at the end? Because I see the 118.13.
We would push those into there. So then I generally update those as soon as we're all done.
So
Yep.
this is not updated.
Yep, that part isn't updated. I update all the legalities once we thoroughly cross-reference. Thank you, good question.
General concept of splitting these to align with, that would align more with the WASB template, which is something that we've talked about, that we've generally adopted, or maybe specifically adopted. And I don't see any disadvantage to splitting them.
Yeah,
My initial thought is, sometimes when you have a longer policy, it's just harder to read and digest. So if the idea is to aid the reader to say, here's a part that deals with one piece, and here's a part that deals with another piece, I think there's some merit to that, but maybe you can just generally describe if, because I'm not sure there's a downside to splitting them.
exactly. And I'm thinking of an end user, someone who is thinking, of around harassment, or when we get into the student side, harassment and bullying or something of that nature. I don't think it's clear unless you're sitting here using policy all the time. When I think of the general public and being able to look at and find what they need, it felt user-friendly and more content appropriate. One is a general umbrella around, education opportunities and equal access. And the other, to me, is its own topic of harassment. Yes, they're connected. They can occur if you're not, but they felt like two separate things. So again, I'm thinking of an end user that's not necessarily someone who's as in-depth on policy as you are, as board members.
Mm-hmm.
And this recall is one where our student government, as soon as we kind of go through with an overarching, I am meeting with them on Friday with the student government. They were interested at the high school level as trying to put this in a little bit more student-friendly language. Students don't go to policy either, but they were talking about kind of expectations and how could we put that in some student-friendly language. So I'll start my work with student government this Friday.
And my initial reaction is the changes that we talked about, changing the citations, putting them at the end, rather than adding them in policy wording. That all seems to make sense. And like I said before, my initial reaction is splitting it out actually makes it more user-friendly, because if a parent or someone or a student is looking for something on harassment, they don't have to read through half the policy to get to it. So I'd be supportive of splitting it out.
I also would put an AR right behind it that tells you if you feel like you've been a victim of harassment, exactly how to make a formal complaint on that. So there, again, if an end user needs access to that information, it's all coming as a package. So I would propose that as well. What I will do then, if we're okay with splitting, because the harassment kind of really falls into some of the behavior pieces, I'll split that piece out and then bring it right back to committee. So it comes in with bullying, harassment, it comes with the behavioral piece, if that works for you as a committee.
Kind of
Is that
a
okay?
collection of similar
Yeah,
topics.
so it's kind of nested in together and we can see the nuances in context. So if that works for you both, then I would recommend we do that. So you'll
Okay.
see them separate, like that, and then I'll put it in the context with the bullying piece as well. Excellent, thank you. I'll clean up all those other kind of redundant citations and all of that as well.
So we'll get a second look at it.
Yep.
All right.
Yeah, as a committee, which
Right, as a committee.
sometimes when we need, but I think it's nice to see it mocked up when it's a significant change, and I think having the harassment alongside the other behavioral type ones, I think would be important too. All right, so we'll do that. The next one is participation of non-public school students in district programs and activities. So the top part is our current policy. And it focuses on students being able to take up to 2 courses and kind of what those parameters are. It's totally allowable, it's guided by state statute, we welcome students to participate in that. The update that's in green below is the WASB update. I recommend we really take a look at updating the full thing. It talks about as well, not only courses, but you can participate in interscholastic athletics and extracurricular activities. That was a change quite a few years ago in law, and we want to just be really transparent. We work hand in hand with private parochial or homeschool partners so that all of our students in our community have access to those pieces, and I think it should be clearly stated in policy. Again, when I read our current, it's just kind of around if you want access to courses, how you go about it.
So the proposed language on the bottom would be replacement of what's on
Yeah.
top? It would be replaced, okay.
Yeah.
Right.
And again, it's the conditions are, you have to meet admission requirements, you're a resident, and that we have sufficient space. So those parameters are always there, so I'm not gonna displace enrolled students for a course, and we're protecting the course if there were prerequisite, there's some demonstration. And our counselors are adept at even if you're homeschooled, you have some kind of transcripts or completion pieces that they're adept at reviewing, and we have students participate in this way often.
So this is something that occurs from time to time?
Yep, it does occur from time to time, and we welcome that, but again, that nuance of understanding that we also allow participation in all the interscholastic, I think it opens up, some of the things, John, I think about, how you're talking about like, okay, people are interested in growing wrestling and doing that, how can we do that? It's like, these are ways that you grow that by opening up opportunity to the full community.
And this is homeschool kids or kids that don't, and I know people that take advantage of, joining the
Yeah.
normal population of schools.
Yeah,
when they're homeschooled
absolutely.
for certain classes and stuff that they can't obviously do in their curriculum they follow.
Yeah, especially, you see it especially when you're getting into higher level mathematics, certainly at the high school level. But then, like I said, a lot of sports and extracurriculars. We want students to engage with us at all levels. And sometimes, the size of some of those programs, it affords opportunity, even for us, that we can grow something and have a solid team when we're welcoming others from the community, so.
Yeah, and orchestra and band, stuff like that.
Yeah, it's in keeping, they can select which courses, but taking a look at that, it's just updating that language and making it a little bit more clear. It's expanded beyond.
I like the new language, actually. I think it's clearer.
Yeah.
Better laid out.
And I think another piece that helps us navigate those pieces of enrollment is having centralized registration. That was a move that was made it was, I think, right before I came on board. This will be my third year. But I think that helps families navigate because they might reach out with questions. So instead of 10 people maybe answering a question, we have a central registration that it's really adept at, here's some pathways to those opportunities, so. But I will move that language forward. I think it's a little bit more clear. The next, go ahead.
Just one thing, so in our current language, we have students must agree and abide by public school rules. We don't have anything similar to that in the new stuff?
Anyone who's enrolled, whether it's for one class or whatever, will be subject to our rules.
So be according to the school handbook,
Yeah.
right? Okay, that's
Once
kinda
you're
what
enrolled, you fall under all those other pieces
that's what I
too.
assumed, that's what
Yep.
I assumed, but
Yep.
I just didn't know if you want to have it in
Good
there.
question, yeah. The next piece is an overarching around student healthcare services, just a minor edit. We would again remove that statute reference within the policy language itself. It'll be reflected down below when we update all those other references, if it still exists, so. And this is just showing that we do provide for student healthcare services in accordance with the law.
Does that have to get pushed to a new page? Or can it stay on this current page?
Or the citation.
Yeah.
It'll stay all on the same page when they get
Just
printed.
bottom of the document. where-
Yeah, it'll
where
just
that
appear at
lands.
the bottom when we update it. I would, in reading this, it might be confusing for people. We do an online enrollment registration process. Maybe instead of district emergency form, because they might not make that connection, district emergency information. Because that's housed in a system that's tagged to their school.
So this is an incredibly.
Just so people aren't confused going, I didn't fill out that form,
Yeah.
but it's like you did as part of the online process.
It's an incredibly picky, lawyerly
Yes.
like comment.
Nope, go for it.
So the
That's my policy then, because you like it.
the italicized portion, which I
Yes. Mm-hmm.
agree with, in the event of emergency situations, district staff shall respond by calling 911 and requesting an ambulance paramedic unit. We may want to say something like, in the event of an emergency health situation, right? Because if it's a fire, you're probably not requesting an ambulance, you want to request a fire truck. You see what I'm saying?
Sure.
Just to clarify.
Any emergency
Health
situation,
or
well,
health.
just calling 911, 911.
Calling 911, because maybe they will decide what,
I better make sure my phone's not listening to me.
oh. That Siri accidentally calls
All
911.
right, don't say it, don't say it.
Okay, sorry.
I'm gonna say requesting, because I think dispatch,
They need to call.
they make that call of who
They'll
they're
ask what's
sending,
going on.
not us.
Right,
Yeah, you
Right,
can
right.
request all day long, they're gonna dispatch what they need to.
right, exactly. So I think that's
Yep, let's remove that one.
great. I like that.
Any other pieces? You do, just a reminder, in accordance with state law, you do annually review.
I was gonna ask that.
Yeah, you do that.
I remember
Yeah, Amy Brager comes
Yeah.
and provides you the report, gives you an overview of how many services, the project add-on, the certifications, all those different things. She does that annually. It's usually in kind of the summer months. June is the end of our year and we take care of that before we start the following year.
Great.
So, and even though it's redundant, it's nice to have that in policy. Even
Sure.
though it's redundant to what the expectation is. Any other questions around that piece? Okay. The emergency nursing services, upon review, there were no recommendations. So if you want to take a look and.
So maybe as a matter of background, if we could just talk about some situations where this would come into play.
Sure.
When we talk about emergent, is it, in the event of a student having a health emergency of some sort? Maybe you can give some
So-
examples, put this in context.
Yeah, so a lot of districts, so we're blessed in West Bend that we have certified staff, whether it's full RNs, LPNs, we have our health rooms fully staffed in those pieces. Not all districts operate that way. It might be the school secretary who serves in that capacity and has some training. This is obligating and making sure that every district, regardless of how they choose to staff that, you have a comprehensive plan around nursing services you're obligated to provide. I can't exclude your child because your child requires to be tube fed and all that. Whoa, I don't have capacity here, you can't come to school. This is reinforcing the obligation of us to have a plan and have nursing services that are accessible. Again, we go above and beyond, and I'm thankful for that in the expertise that we have and the staffing that we have in our schools. But
Sure, so from an.
it's also then stating that you will, even though we have a variety of skilled people now, that you will maintain someone who is a registered nurse that oversees your program. Amy Brager serves in that role. Because if I were a smaller district, and like I said, I'm serving in a different capacity, or I have health room trained individuals, I still have to seek an RN who authorizes and oversees that program. And it's connected to their licensure and their expertise.
That makes sense. That's helpful. When you talk about emergency nursing services, I would imagine that kind of the suite of services that are offered through the nursing program might include non-emergency things like I have a child who every 3 hours needs a medication, right? So that certainly is encompassed within nursing services. When we're talking about emergency nursing services.
Because I don't maintain an on-site clinic for students. Some organizations may do that, and we wouldn't want people to get confused and think they can start using our nursing staff, our certified staff as primary care in some way. Yes, we'll execute on those pieces, as you said, medication that they might need, all those other pieces, but those are services that they absolutely must need. And in many cases, when you talk about medication, it's like, can this be given at home? Can this be given here? You know, that's the optimal situation, but yeah, and it's around, you know, scrapes, bumps, that kind of thing, but again, not coming to us for primary care.
Are we required to have a certain number of each of these type of staff, you know, RNs and stuff like that?
No, you're required to have on our end who oversees the whole thing, some kind of certified nurse, who's gonna oversee your whole program.
But we're not required, you know,
Per thousand.
yeah,
No.
for size wise, you know, we have to have 3 or something of a certain way.
Nope. No, every organization is a little bit different. That's the one thing that you have to need is someone who's overseeing it. And then you also have to have a community physician agreement that they're going to be your, don't even ask me our physician's name, he signed on again, thankfully. But always, it's kind of a in-kind thing that the nurse can call for consult,
Sure.
if needed.
That's cool.
Good.
Great. The next one, we went through, it's around our AED. Both Amy and I recommended full replacement with updated language from WASB. You can see we just had a couple lines that talked about AEDs in our current policy, and we would recommend the below.
Paragraph, green paragraph number 3,
Mhm.
I like the language.
Mhm.
Is that something we do today where we work, you know, with our local first responders as it relates to, these are AEDs, here's where they are? Because that's how I read this. Is that
Yep.
something in other words, is that something we're doing today? Or if we would enact this policy, is it something that we need to do in the future?
Something we're currently doing. Not only do they have an understanding of our buildings, then there's maps there, they're all clearly marked, and then there's also, we're registered. There's apps for your phone where you can find an AED and it'll click on and locate the AEDs for you. Yep, so if you're out in public, anyone, that's a good safety measure. So we do that. They also oversee, if you recall our safety session, they come and oversee all of our Project Adam certifications. We do some announced training, and then we do some unannounced training where we go in and fake an emergency requiring this. And then all of our first responders are also observing, and it's like they go through the motions of calling, they dispatch, you know, an ambulance, they go through the whole process, and that's part of the Project Adam certification, and then do feedback. So we do multiple, there's a team, a special response team for each building. So even though you might have certification, then there's many at each school that kind of raise their hand to be part of that first responders team on site. So yeah, it's not new practice, it's just updating the language.
I like it.
The next one is around communicable and infectious diseases, bloodborne pathogens. You'll see we had some old language stemming from kind of way back when, and it hasn't been touched in a while. The replacement language is from WASB, and one thing is, and we already have this in our handbooks, and it refers people to that Wisconsin Childhood Communicable Diseases chart, and what those are and how we respond. And then just some additional pieces, you know, that's health information, people's interest in keeping that private, whether they're a staff member or student are observed around that. But our management plan, if there's a risk, kind of depending what that is, there may be some pieces of exclusions, or if there's a contractor on site or contracted service, anyone. So if we would have to restrict staff or students, that would be kind of anyone who's going to be present in our building around that. Instances of when you close for public health reasons, the most that I've seen are outbreaks of generally a flu, where it hits really swiftly, really hard. You can't staff, you can't, and all of a sudden you're getting closure. Also, the public health agencies help monitor attendance. Anytime you're creeping into like a 20% absent rate and unknown, do you have rotavirus going through? Do you have something going through? Parents probably, they're accustomed to this. Schools are so much bigger, it rarely ever happens. But I've been at an adjacent district where all of a sudden it was almost like clockwork at noon, it was like a movie scene of everyone kind of throwing up and like having to go respond in immediate closure, and then you're kind of going into deep cleaning. So it happens. And it's just kind of on behalf of everyone to disrupt whatever cycle of illness you might have going. Any questions on that?
The only question I have is kind of almost in the dead center. It's highlighted that communicable diseases are outlined in Wisconsin. There's actually a charge for this.
There is, and I think one that people, and Amy and I talked about this, and we double checked our handbook too to make sure we were really clear, because people sometimes they always assume around head lice, and that you have to be excluded from school in any kind of head lice situation, and that's, that's kind of a separate incident, and that you go through, and it's whether there's nits or live, and there's all these nuances to what is deemed communicable, what's not. So even though it's not so stated, or some people might have separate policy because you can't restrict kids from attending in certain cases, we have that laid out in our language in our handbook for families so that they know and understand that. And we would help identify that for families and help get them access to treatment or make some recommendations around that, but people sometimes think that does or doesn't fall within this scope.
But is this still talking about bloodborne pathogens also?
Good call. This one does not, they just have that line. Do we want to keep it, either restrict the headline on it, or keep that one that there is a bloodborne pathogen exposure plan? And we do have that.
That's all I was thinking. I don't know if you want to
Grab
change
those
that
two
a little bit,
sentences.
or do something with it to add it in so it is still applicable.
Yeah, because you're not required to have your own separate, we do have to have a plan. I think, to your point, John, just grabbing those two sentences and putting them at the end, we could keep that
Sure.
title.
Yep.
And then people can. I'll double check too to see what kind of reference we have in our student handbooks, if any updates need to be made there as well. Any questions on that? Great. The next one was on infectious disease and pandemic flu. Again, removing additional policy references within. It's talking about the scope of homework and makeup work and all of that at the end. And that's present in other policies and practice. I don't think it's needed. This was one, it was actually, you can see how old this is. It predates COVID, so we never had to put into play an extra COVID policy or anything like that. And this gave us latitude, I think, to consult with people who we needed to consult with, but then we also were continuously in compliance because everything is stated as a rule, a regulation, or an obligation I have versus, in the most recent pandemic flu, a lot of things were guidance, and it maintained and preserved local control. So I think this does that. So, but again, I would recommend we remove those policy references to homework within this. They're not needed.
Right, if a student, for instance, were absent because, God forbid, they broke their leg and they were out for 2 weeks, that's not a communicable disease. We've got this in other policies around
Exactly.
extended absence. That's your point, I think, right?
Yep.
I agree.
Like I said, I think the language served us well. It maintained local control for us in many, many ways.
It's brief and to the point.
Exactly. Looking at the next one, student medication, you'll see recommendation, removing, we had some brief language and then updating to the new WASB language. certified health staff would then work with Amy to just update the AR that goes with it, based on policy updates. We go through medication training. There's specific modules designed by the state and we get certifications. You have to update that. I do mine annually. It's just good practice because I don't often have to do that. But otherwise, I think that's on a 3-year cycle that's required. Anyone, if you're a teacher and you're going on a field trip and you're gonna have to step in and you have to maintain that certification through the state. So we monitor that as part of our beginning of the year training pieces. And then they certainly prepare that medication. There's certain protocols, and then their secretaries, oftentimes principals, are backups to that. So everyone maintains that piece.
Thanks for that clarification. The first line of the green, let's see, sentence number 2, school personnel, and then parentheses, including employees, comma, registered nurses serving the district. Should there be an or in there or an and? I mean, does employees mean it is only registered nurses, or does it, what do we mean there?
I'm gonna recommend an or, but sometimes you have agency professionals. So I worked in a district where we had 2 community nurses, community benefit nurses given to us by a separate organization, but they were still nurses and they were honored to fulfill that role in schools and working. So I think it's just recognizing that they might not be staff members, but they are registered nurses who have been authorized. So I'm gonna switch that to an or. Go ahead.
But then here, it says no school personnel other than healthcare professionals shall be involuntarily required to administer any medication to the student.
Correct. So let's talk about that a little bit. So a teacher who, I have a student who's diabetic, doesn't do self-care yet, and I have a teacher who's like, I am so uncomfortable with giving a shot, I don't know how to do that. I don't know how to do these pieces, right? It's a function of the healthcare person's job, but I can't require someone who that's not their job. I might find someone else, or someone might go with that person because I'm not comfortable doing that. I'm not, I don't have that skill set. Could so-and-so do it instead? So it's giving them that opportunity because it's not a primary function of their job.
Makes sense?
Any other questions on that one? And we do have, like I said, I mean, we do tube feedings, we do all sorts of different things through our health rooms so that students can access and be successful in school.
I mean, if this is straight from Osley, then you should probably actually recommend the or to them also, because that's not even a proper
Yeah.
sentence.
Yeah,
Well, I looked at it.
I'll get that.
I was thinking about grammar. When you say Bill, comma, my brother, comma, it's like that, they're the same thing. And when I saw employees, registered nurses, like only employees that are registered nurses,
Right.
Sorry, that's probably too much detail
No, we
for
do that. Remember
sorry.
our first one? Like, do we believe in the Oxford comma?
Oxford
Don't
comma,
we?
right?
We're a little geeky like that. That's a good thing when you look at it down to the comma, you're doing the right work in policy.
Well, just to clarify, and then we can put this to bed.
Yeah.
In that parentheses, when we talk about including employees, we're talking about employees also, including them, who are not necessarily health professionals.
Correct.
So we just want to be,
Yep,
yeah, good, okay,
makes sense.
then we're on the same page.
Perfect. In the next one, there's one around student allergies. I didn't change any of the content. What I did was I put the food allergy stuff together and the latex sensitivity pieces together, and I gave it a heading. I just thought it was more clear. So the only new language is the food allergy heading, the latex sensitivity, and I just put those pieces together. I thought it was important to call out. So I think the biggest thing around this policy, you might have, everyone thinks about nut allergies, right? And in classes and classrooms, you might have an allergy protocol where we don't overpromise a nut-free environment or a nut-free bus or anything like that, right? We make a classroom allergy aware. We might have a table in lunchrooms where any child, not just the student who has the allergy, can sit together as long as that's a nut-free area for the safety of the kids, that kind of case. And also there's certain sensitivities around latex. So we mindfully do not purchase products with latex prevalent in them, any of our health room supplies, et cetera. around that sensitivity. But again, in the policy, it's just kind of setting those conditions. It's helpful in sometimes, like I said, sometimes an allergy is life-threatening for students, and parents might feel that we have an obligation to create this bubble of absolutely zero tolerance, and that's just not realistic for schools. So it's kind of setting those boundaries. We understand, we're aware, we'll put in protocols, procedures to help you feel assured that we're keeping your child safe, but there's gonna be some confines to that environment as well.
I would just say the spacing after food allergies is driving me nuts.
So,
Yeah, that was some of the things today,
I was
like,
kind of
we're like,
assuming it was with the
It's-
font size and stuff.
it's a bad day for board docs, so.
It almost
Right,
feels like
I'm
it's
with you
missing
on
a
that.
sentence that's hidden.
Any other questions about? Great. We're gonna have to tell Joel we're way more effective when he's not here.
no kidding. Maybe it's when he watches the replay. Actually, just out of curiosity, so when we talk through this, let's say somebody is having an allergic response, where normally, at home you might say, oh, here, give them Benadryl or do something like. I'm assuming that's something that's incorporated then in that emergency nursing services. There's a protocol around that. In other words, we're not just willy-nilly
Correct, so.
medicating.
Well, there's a couple things to that. It's a good thing you bring that up. So all schools actually do have EpiPens because it takes a first incident to know that a child's allergic. Or an allergy like a bee allergy, something like that can develop at any time.
Okay.
So they do have a thing where everyone does have a general EpiPen, right? So if we see that and we know it and we can give epinephrine
Okay.
to a child that's experiencing that.
So we have a protocol around that.
Yep, so we have those pieces. In this case that you're talking about allergies, that has an individualized student plan and then the if-then, right? So let's say I've got a student and if-then, we're gonna bring that child in, we're gonna monitor for this many minutes, and if it stays localized to this, if this, then they get Benadryl. If it proceeds to this, parent, notification, like if this, then you're giving their EpiPen, then, or this child's of an age and of thing where they're self-carrying, all of those kinds of things. So there's some individual plans. So as you said, it's not willy-nilly, it's individualized to the child based on what their needs are.
I see, so these are allergies known in advance. All right, thank you.
The next one is animals in classrooms and on school premises. So we do sometimes have them. And they might come in and be part of, what did we have the other day? Programs,
Like the
showing off reptiles. Yeah, I was gonna say, it's usually like gross reptiles or something oohing and eyeing over. So it could be a curriculum connection. It's part of the natural environment, so there's pieces. Sometimes they have a classroom pet that they're doing short-term. I forget which school is it. Maybe it's Decorah, where they have chicks that they hatch and do that. So it's just talking about the protocols, because they may create a health or safety issue for a student or a staff member. And so it's just showing chains of authority on that. And then they are just kind of who needs to be informed. We would be informing families, like, we're gonna have a dog come visit, we're gonna have this or that come visit. So, like I said, they might not think, well, my child doesn't encounter a reptile every day at school, but here's this one special occasion, like, ooh, you have to watch for this, that kind of thing. There's also the nuance of animals as service animals. Now, I am not talking emotional support animals, comfort animals, anything like that. With kids, they have service animals. Now, I put service animal because it's not always just a dog. Dave was laughing at me. I'm like, well, in the state of Wisconsin, you can have a Shetland pony.
Do you have a mini horse?
You can have a mini horse. I've never seen it. I'm just waiting for the one day I get that. But also in so that's a decision for a student with a disability of some kind where that is required for their health and safety. But in that case, you're usually onboarding an animal when the child is older. The child has to be in control of the animal. So sometimes you might be doing some training things or stuff like that, but rarely do you see a little one with an animal. They're usually kind of training in the home and doing all those pieces, but they have to be fully in control. I did add that, so a team, there's an individualized education program. That team or a 504 is around a disability, declaring a disability and the accommodation is needed. While that team and the parents are part of that decision, right? No one can say do this to the other. They're part of that. While they might make the decision, you don't need authorization from the principal in that case because that team's making that decision. I'm adding that the principal should be informed and part of planning for the animal to be present at school because they're gonna know the nuances of we now need to communicate with all families, we need to do these pieces and all of that. They should be informed of what's going on at the school and be part of planning for the success of that transition of an animal in or out. Any questions on this piece? Again, just making sure we're informing families so that they can help guide.
I guess,
Go ahead.
well, okay, never mind.
Okay.
I got nothing. I was gonna maybe say a change to the title, but it really doesn't need to.
Okay.
Because it's not only around service animals, so.
Yep.
I just,
Right,
Yeah, it could be someone at a
Yeah.
football game and, like walking your dog on property, like, nope, only service animals are here. Yep.
right, but also the reptile example, right? It could be animals on the
That
floor.
they just live on
The
our
display-
property.
Well, the display, right?
Right.
Yeah.
The next one, this will get reviewed by a district committee. We just updated this. We brought it into alignment with expectations. There is a district wellness committee. They would bring that consistent review and then they bring it for a cycle of ongoing review. We have no changes recommended to this one. But right behind it, and this might be where it's easier to have a handout, we had an existing 452, which was student wellness, right? So it should just be general wellness, right? And then it lays in, because there's all these requirements now in statute around wellness and the teams you have to have and the reporting and all of that. We have this one-off wellness one in 452, and it's talking about the plan, the periodic evaluation. These pieces are contained in the requirements, and this follows kind of what the statute requires. So I left them there side by side. I would recommend we remove the 452, we hold with that general wellness one, unless there was any piece, because again, this is the overarching policy that the district will have a plan that's guided by a committee and some work.
And it's interesting, because thanks for laying it out that way. In both policies, they're the number of paragraphs 1 through 5, they're identical. I mean, it looks at first glance
Yep.
that they're identical. When you have that much overlap, why can't these be combined?
Right, it's the same information, and then it's just, like I said, when we updated it before, it was looking at, like, these were the extra pieces that you needed to have. And it's holding the district accountable for having a wellness committee, for having those pieces, making decisions in collaboration with your nutritional staff, with different representatives on that.
Yeah.
So 458 meets that test because it is one of those that's required. And so we could sunset 452 in my eyes.
To me, it looks, I would agree. I mean, again, it's not
There's-
exactly word for word, but
It's,
the 452, the first paragraph, nutrition, that's
They-
over on the
yep.
other side. The second paragraph is there, the third paragraph is there.
I think
Numbered
they-
ones are there?
I think when we inherited them, they had one, that it's like the same policy, but they had one say students and
Right,
one be, and it's like, you just need one.
right. Well, I wonder, the longer one, the
Mhm.
one that we would keep, talks quite a bit about USDA. So I wondered if maybe that was a policy that needed to exist in order for USDA and school nutrition, et cetera, that
It's required and we get a little progress report on if our policy meets the tests of the requirements.
got it. So a combined.
Yeah.
I'm in support of a combined
So-
policy because there's so much overlap already, just as long as we believe
It
that
just meets everyone's
that
needs.
meets USDA. Okay. Interesting.
Yeah, and like I said, I think they were just, because they were in different buckets. One was for adults, one was for, and it's like, well, we don't need it to be like that anymore, which is fine. Student fees, we just talked about some student fees at our last board meeting. Student fees was sitting as a 470. Student fees is really 656 in WASB. So I recommend we renumber that first. But I left, so you could see all the language in black is our current fees and those pieces. I would recommend we sunset all of that and go to the legal language, which is talking about, because people always we have a free and appropriate public education, but we charge fees. So what are the fees? The fees are actually required that it can only be, specialized funding or materials. So it's showing that we understand that and we're restricting and going through those fees. But it's also saying that the student fee schedule should be reviewed and adopted annually by a board. I think that's really important. That should come before you every single year in context. So this year we brought it together in pieces because we needed the high school to get into their handbook, but then we'll bring the rest. That's something a board should decide every single year. What are the fees? Why are they there? Are these the ones we're moving forward with? We haven't changed fees, like I said, in quite a while. We just updated the high school and removed a whole bunch of fees because we were seeing them as part of the program. And then it's further saying that, that there's financial support available and that whenever we communicate kind of those pieces, we're also going to co-communicate that financial aid, if you need to fill out those paperworks, anytime I'm going to talk about fees, here's a pathway to financial support should you need it. And that we're going to post that annually on our website, and any means we're going to, again, kind of co-mingle in any handbook or anything we put, here's the fees, but because you don't want a financial strain for a family to be a burden for their child's participation in something. So we always want to be communicating that there's avenues of support available to them. So it's holding us accountable to be dually communicating. And then also accurate, timely collection of fees, overseeing the business office, really that they have a process procedure for that. So we're not languishing and kids aren't, staring down thousands of dollars in uncollected fees by the time that they graduate from us.
So is the proposal, the green
The
language
green language.
would totally
yes.
replace everything?
Mhm.
Okay, so this would be
All these other
room to
pieces,
replace.
yeah, they're part of that annual plan. We
Well-
bring forward those, that get put in handbooks and all that. Having in policy, your lock and all of those, that's procedural pieces. That's not policy.
Right, I mean, that was my initial impression when looking at the pre-existing language, like in paragraph 3, physical education, it talks about students supplying their own tire and shoes, makes sense. Individual heart monitor straps may be purchased, that seems very specific to put into a school board policy, but
Right, and that's not even how it's done anymore.
another good reason to change it.
Right. So again, it's still resting that has annually reviewed, approved, even when there's no changes to it, it still has to come before a board annually. So this is setting up that process for analyzing, recommending, and approving fees on an annual basis.
And you said this code will be 678?
It would be 656 is the appropriate one, yeah.
And what section is that?
That's the finance one. 600 series are the financial series. Any questions on that piece?
Sounds good.
Okay. Well, with that said, again, most efficient work ever. This was the slate related to some odds and ends as well as nursing services. The next slate will be around some of the enrollment opportunities, entrance ages. The psychologists have been working on that. They really oversee and do pieces of that, as well as the assistant principals have spent countless hours reviewing all the ones around student behavior. There's about 16 policies left, and we'll move through those two groups at our next meeting. I've got availability, so I'll be able to, by our next meeting, get those out to our team and be able to publicize those and schedule. We had talked about some of the nuances before, if the committee's still interested. We've kind of got the policy language around behavior, but we also have some practice stuff. So if that's still an avenue we want to kind of go a little bit more in depth on, I'm happy to invite the assistant principals and talk about practice with them too. if that's okay with the group. Because like I said, some of it will be in policy, but some of it's practice, and so what does that look like in their everyday world? Because they're the ones having to utilize that.
Sounds
So
good.
that's what we'll do. So with that said, Mr. Donaldson, you're chairing tonight if you see it fit to adjourn.
Do I need to make a motion?
Nope, you don't have to do a motion, you would just,
No?
you have that power
Consensus?
all on your own.
Exactly right.
All right, I'll call this meeting adjourned then.
Thank you very
Excellent.
much.
Thank you. Our camera, right?
Yeah.
Good.
And